Right, so before the Echoes from Essex project, I'd never even heard of Gulielma Lister. And since then, I've become rather fascinated by her. Well, you've all heard that my partner Clive is here, so he thinks I've become a bit obsessed. But I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to everybody else about Gulielma Lister. But I have had to do all my research during lockdown. And so I couldn't visit the archives, which I'd very much like to do. But I would especially like to thank Maureen Measure and David Boot for all the help that they gave me. So Gulielma Lister, she was known as Guli to her friends. She lived her entire life in Leytonstone. She's not particularly famous now, but for some botanists, she's the equivalent of Isaac Newton in physics. So I haven't actually made this journey, but what I'm told is if you head off down Leytonstone High Road, starting from the Tesco Superstore's end, you will see this large church on the right. And that replaces Sycamore House, which was demolished in the 1950s. And you can see Gulielma Lister standing outside it, surrounded by her roses. And she was born there, and she died there when she was nearly 90. So her father, Arthur Lister, bought it in 1857, and that was the year after the railway station opened. And he was a wine merchant in London, so that meant that he could commute into the city. This looks like a very comfortable Victorian house, but inside he concealed a scientific laboratory. Her father was an expert botanist, and he spent all his spare time studying some rather strange organisms called slime moulds. Her father referred to them as well, I will fill in for Francis. His father referred to them as his living creepies because sometimes they send out tendrils that crawl around looking for food. And these are just two of 900 roughly different species around the world. And they vary in size from a few centimetres across to as much up to several square meters. So Arthur Lister recruited Gulielma as his research assistant, and after he died, she became the world expert. She was once celebrated as the queen of slime moulds, which might not sound a very appealing title.
No, Patricia, it could be an appealing title. Sorry to interrupt, but if you sing it, it sounds much grander, like this. The queen of slime moulds, forever she will be. The queen of slime mould, forever she will be.
Well, you're right, that sounds wonderful. At least it sounds wonderful when you do it. It wouldn't if I did. Slime moulds are vastly more interesting than their name suggests. And among the many people who shared her fascination was
the Emperor of Japan. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away. I'll go away.
She named a specimen after him, and he sent her this beautiful pair of enamelled vases to thank her. Now, according to her friend Muriel Arber, who was a geologist, Sycamore House was, we've lost Francis again, a beautiful old house which had become engulfed and isolated in a very poor neighbourhood. It was Lister's main home for the best part of a century, and she lived through many changes. She was over 50 when the First World War started, and she stayed in Leytonstone right through the Second War as well, and the house was pretty quiet inside by then. There was just Gulielma and one of her elder sisters, Edith. Whereas outside, buses and cars ploughed up and down the busy main road. In contrast with their childhood when their soundscape was confused with people and birds and horse-drawn carriages. Their childhood sounds like a lot of fun. She was one of 7 children, and she remembered when her uncle and aunt came to stay. She said he behaved
like a boy among us at the big family gatherings, throwing himself with wholehearted enjoyment into all the games, however childish, that we played.
over the years. The family employed various governesses, cooks, cleaners to look after them all. Very little evidence survives of all these servants, except for one, the local Barkus family. So John Barkus took the last surviving photograph of Gulielma Lister when she was nearly 90. One of his Barkus relatives had been the Lister's housekeeper. But she became homeless after a bombing raid in 1944. So the Lister sisters invited her and a couple of her relatives to move into Sycamore House, and they remained there for 6 years, and they looked after these 2 elderly women. But Gulielma Lister did definitely not match the stereotype of a stay-at-home spinster. She'd been to Europe with her family by the time she was 16, and before long she'd been over to America and Canada and the West Indies. So in the early 20th century, all that travelling was pretty unusual for a single woman. But she visited museum collections all over Europe, in Paris, in Strasbourg, in Leyden, in Christiania, and she knew all the curators and she met them while she was there. She also visited some pretty remote spots for her botanical work.
I remember seeing in Switzerland, high on the Alps, the white sporangia of that hardy species, Diderma niveum, clustered on the slender stalk of a blue soldanella flower, which had just pierced through the snow.
Only a few photos of her survive, and it's difficult to know what sort of person she was. She came from a long line of distinguished Quakers, and many people remembered her as being generous, self-effacing, 2 very strong Quaker qualities. But on the other hand, many people found it difficult to accept that a woman could be a professional scientist. It seemed such an unusual career choice. So one woman, rather cattily, described as
a horsey sort of man.
But there were far more comments like this one by a female botanist.
Tall, slender, handsome, dignified, but gracious and so kind. A perfect gentlewoman with an old-world courtesy.
She was extremely close to her family, which contained eminent scientists in several generations. So her grandparents were Joseph Jackson Lister and Isabella Lister, née Harris. So Joseph Jackson accumulated a considerable fortune as a wine merchant, but his real hobby was microscopy. You can see him here with one of the microscopes that he invented. And he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of London, and he encouraged his children to study science as well. Now you can see that her grandmother is wearing a Quaker bonnet, and that Quaker identity remained very, very important for the Listers right down through the generations. And in their private letters, they addressed each other as thee and thou. So these are some of the microscope lenses that Joseph Jackson Lister invented. They were very high quality, and they enabled people to get much more precise views and for much more greater magnification than they'd been able to in the past. Gulielma Lister's father used them, and she probably used them as well. So it was also a sort of typical sort of science for Quakers to practice, because Quakers were banned from the universities. But on the other hand, they weren't particularly keen on sort of sciences like physics and chemistry, which seemed to them rather abstract. What they thought science should be about was to study nature as a spiritual activity that revealed the beauty of God's creation. So typical Quaker sciences were astronomy and above all biology. Quakers also valued female education. When the couple first met, Isabella Harris, her grandmother, was teaching reading and writing to small girls at Ackworth School near Pontefract.
Fun for free. GHIJK. We will sing for Dave. LMNOPQRST.
She must have been a very good teacher, because under her tuition, the girls performed far better than the boys.
XYZ. We will know the alphabet before we go to bed.
Ackworth was one of England's leading Quaker academies, and it was the first to cater for poorer families. And in her own life, Gulielma Lister followed that philanthropic tradition by carrying out voluntary work for various educational charities. In 1825, her grandfather moved down from Yorkshire because he bought Upton House, which had belonged previously to a succession of Quaker owners. As you can see, it was a large riverside mansion, it had lots of trees, and it was only a few miles for him to ride his horse along the side of the river into the city. And the move had been recommended to him by a close friend, Samuel Gurney, who was a banker and was Elizabeth Fry's brother. And he lived at Ham House, which then was next door to Upton House, and they'd been combined in West Ham Park. And earlier, during the 18th century, Upton House had been owned by Dr. John Fothergill, and he was an eminent Quaker doctor and philanthropist, and it was him who'd founded Ackworth School that I showed you just now. And Gulielma's father, Arthur, and all his 6 siblings grew up in Upton House. So one of her uncles was a famous surgeon, Joseph Lister. So I've shown on the right an imaginary picture of a surgical theatre in the Victorian period, because he's celebrated for introducing antisepsis into surgery, which of course reduced the infection rate and meant that surgery became far less dangerous than it had been in the past. And he was made a baron for this service, and he chose the title Lord Lister of Lyme Regis, because that's where he spent the summers with Gulielma and the rest of their family. And like Gulielma Lister, he was a very keen botanist.
Mistletoe, coffee, chamomile, pomegranate, saffron, rosemary, mistletoe.
So this sketchbook is from one of his field trips. And with Gulielma, he made a collection of 250 dried plants, that's called a herbarium. This included 100 from Essex, and it's still carefully preserved in the archives at the Essex Field Club. And here's her father with several of the children. Gulielma is the little girl in the white dress who's standing in the middle. And like her grandfather, her father Arthur ran a wine business, but he also followed the Quaker injunction to spend as much leisure time as possible in improving activities that would prevent him from becoming over preoccupied with the competitive world of commercial business. So her father was, like his father before him, was passionate about science. He became a Fellow of the Royal Society, and he could make very high quality observations using the special microscope lenses that his father had invented, and both these men were extremely well known and distinguished. Gulielma's mother, Susanna, was the daughter of a ship owner, and she was a very skilled artist, and she taught all the children, including Gulielma, how to draw and paint. So Gulielma was educated at home by various governesses and her parents, apart from 1 year at Bedford College when she was 16. Bedford College then was in central London, and I couldn't find any pictures of what it looked like when it first opened. But this is a picture of Elizabeth Jesser Reed, who was the woman who founded it. And it was a woman's only institution, and it was the only non-denominational one in the country. It had no religious allegiance at all. So then there's this strange name, Gulielma. So I've got two theories about where she got that name from. One is that it was a favourite Quaker name, because this woman, Gulielma Maria Posthumus Springett, she was a woman from Sussex, and she married one of the very early Quakers, William Penn, who founded Pennsylvania. And the name Posthuma there indicates that she was born after her father died. So that's one theory. And the other theory, they're not necessarily exclusive, but the other theory is that she was named after her maternal grandfather. And he was called William, and Gulielma is the Italian feminine form of William. So Arthur and Susanna named their first two children after his parents, Isabella, she later became a nurse, and Joseph Jackson, who became a zoologist. And then there was Edith, and I assume that that was the name of Susanna's mother, but of course typically because she was a woman, that's not recorded. And then Gulielma, and those were the two middle sisters who ended up living together at Sycamore House until the mid-20th century. And then after them, there came Arthur Jr., and he very sadly, he left the Friends after marrying outside. He became a doctor, but he was killed on active service during the war because he was conscripted. And then finally, there was Ellen and William, the youngest, who became a distinguished eye surgeon. And I imagine, like in even the most well-behaved family, there were arguments from time to time, but basically they remained extremely close throughout their lives, and they saw each other very often. So I think Gulielma Lister benefited enormously from her mother's artistic instruction. These are just four of her pictures, which just show what an excellent scientific illustrator she was. They lived near Wanstead Park. And she often went on expeditions with her father to hunt for plants. As an adult, she compiled a list of 300 different plants in Wanstead Park, each one meticulously listed and labelled. Both she and her father belonged to the Essex Field Club. So on the left, you can see a paper she wrote for the Essex Naturalist called The Water Violet in Epping Forest, and it reveals her deep love of nature.
The frontispiece to the present volume of the Essex Naturalist is a reproduction of a watercolour sketch by my sister, the late Isabella S. Lister. It represents a colony of the water violet, Houtonia palustris, growing in one of the Epping Forest ponds, and was painted about 1890 in early summer when the plant was in full flower. The pond is screened on one side by oaks and low hornbeams. It is one of a group of small gravel pit ponds in which most of the Houtonia flourished at that time. Throughout the year, its rosettes of rich green pectinate foliage could be seen through the clear water, while in summer grew up the tall scapes bearing many whorls of pale mauve primula-like flowers. When we see how the growth of Greater London is continually encroaching on the habitats of our wild flowers, we may well be thankful that Epping Forest provides a sanctuary where such a plant as the water violet is able to survive.
She was president of the Essex Field Club from 1916 to 1919, and she contributed a huge archive of specimens and papers that are all preserved in their museum. So, for example, from the museum, these are her drawings of a water starwort which grows on rocky and shingly shores. And here's a flowering almond.
country life is both pleasant and charming. All thought to walk abroad on a fine summer's morning. Bright Phoebus did shine, and the hills was adorning, as Molly she sat a-milking on a fair summer's morning. No fiddle, no flute, no hautboy, no spinet is to be compared with the lark or the linnet. Down as I did lie, all around the green rushes, 'twas then I did hear the charms of the blackbirds and thrushes.
Every summer, she left Essex and went to Lyme Regis. So the family members clubbed together to buy this large house, high cliff house, that was perched right on top of the cliffs. So on the left, what you can see is a modern photo, and on the right, there's the house taken from the back as it appeared in 1924. And eventually her parents moved in here permanently, and she went back to Leytonstone with two of her sisters. But in 1911, this census form shows that she was living in Lyme Regis with her elder sister and 6 servants. And the house was set in very extensive grounds. They were a wealthy family. And the location was ideal for a family that was so interested in the natural world. So this is her water sketch of the bay and the cliffs at Lyme Regis. And you can see just to the left of the sketch, there's a geological layered drawing. And that's, of course, because Lyme Regis was incredibly important in the Victorian era and the early 20th century for geologists who wanted to study the rock strata, and also for collecting fossils. All sorts of dinosaurs and enormous fossils used to be found there. And she compiled a large scrapbook, which she called her Thesaurus. And it had postcards and drawings, and on the right you can see part of the substantial index that she compiled. So this picture was in her Thesaurus, and it's a photo of the Esplanade at Lyme Regis from about 1890. And it shows the sort of clothes that she would have worn. And here's her hand-drawn copy of a local map. But Gulielma and her family did not indulge themselves in long, relaxed holidays. They studied hard the whole time. And she constantly went walking and sketching and bird watching, collecting plants. And she was inseparable from her pocket telescope. In fact, the family worked so hard that they invented a new name for it. They called it ruggling on.
Oh, we'll go this day a-ruggling, a-ruggling, a-ruggling. We'll go this day a-ruggling on. There's fungi and lichen and slime moulds to find, that we are all for collecting inclined. And birds to watch in the sycamore tree, and sketches to make of the plants that we see. All around the walnut tree, the queen of slime mould forever I shall be. Oh, we'll go this day a-ruggling, a-ruggling, a-ruggling. We'll go this day a-ruggling on. Within the walled garden we pick flowers when we can, to display in a vase from the Emperor of Japan. Upon the thatch there are specimens to catch. All around us are species of our living creepies, and I'm sure you'll agree, all around the walnut tree
And her father set up another laboratory down there that was packed with equipment for them to study mosses, fungi, lichens, slime moulds. Gulielma Lister worked very hard with her father on his definitive book about slime moulds, but she was also an independent researcher. And after he died, she published revised editions of his book. So this one, I've shown you the title page on the right. I put a red arrow on so that you can see her name beneath his. And the original book only had black and white line drawings, like the ones that you can see on the left, which were on the front, was from the frontispiece. But her editions included wonderful coloured drawings that she'd made herself. She also paid for them to be published in the book. And these are just 4 of them. There's many of them if you look at the original book. So she established an international reputation as a first-class researcher and illustrator, and she started to play a very prominent role in biological societies. So in 1905, she was one of the first 25 women admitted after a lot of quarrels as a fellow of London's prestigious Linnean Society. And later on, she became vice president. So this is what the meeting looked like the year that she joined. And I think that that's her in the front on the right in the profile, I think. And for the beginning, she made quite an impression. One younger woman remembered that she
Removed her hat in deference to the sexless character of Othello. It was an unusual thing for a lady to remove her hat, but we took our cue from Miss Lister and did the same.
As the world expert on slime mould, she worked on major collections at Kew Gardens and also at the Natural History Museum in London. So you can see the postcard on the right that she sent to the museum from Lyme Regis, and it says the British Museum because at that stage the Natural History Museum was part of the British Museum. Now she was independently wealthy, so she could afford to carry out all the research she wanted to, but not everybody was so lucky. Her best friend was Annie Lorraine Smith, and she was an expert on lichens, and you can see on the right the authoritative textbook that she wrote. So like Lister, she was one of the first women to join the Linnean Society, and she worked at the Natural History Museum. But officially, the Natural History Museum didn't employ any women until 1928. There were lots of women who worked there, but they were paid piece rates by the hour at a very, very low level. And a lot of them became very senior, but they were earning far less than the men who they were training and whom they supervised. And this was something that Gulielma Lister was furious about. And she complained, this is from the obituary that she wrote for her friend Annie Lorraine Smith. And she wrote,
She remained an unofficial worker to the end.
Lister was also a very keen member of the British Mycological Society, and she was twice elected their president. Now, mycologists study fungi and mushrooms and toadstools, and traditionally they were always regarded as plants, but her speciality was slime moulds. And they represented a bit of a challenge to this conventional distinction because sometimes they seem to move, and nobody could decide whether they should be classed as plants or whether they should be classed as animals. So at the time, there were only 2 options. All living organisms were classed either into the plant kingdom or into the animal kingdom. And now there's several different ways of classifying the living world, but one of the simplest ones is to divide it into 5 kingdoms. So here you can see they're represented on an evolutionary tree. So the most recent group, the one at the top, are animals. And then beneath that, behind that, they came prior to animals, there's plants and then there's fungi. And then below those, on the left, there's got one kingdom which includes organisms such as bacteria. And then on the right at the bottom, there's the group that includes slime moulds. There's several different sorts of slime moulds, but during the last few years, there's been a great surge of interest in one type in particular, which really does behave in an extraordinary, rather spooky sort of way. So these are some pictures from some specimens on display at a zoo in Paris. And the thing is, they look as though they're just sitting on a log or on the ground, but when they get hungry, they send out tendrils and they move around looking for food. So in Paris, this one is nicknamed Le Blob after the American sci-fi horror movie. So what happens is when they get hungry, thousands of tiny, tiny one-celled organisms group together into one great big massive cell with thousands of nuclei inside. They act collaboratively. They haven't got a brain, but mysteriously they behave as though they did. It's very weird. And they seem able to make decisions. So scientists have carried out some experiments to show how they seem to think. And one of the earliest was in Japan. Now this is what a Japanese train sounds like. So on the upper left, you can see the beginning of the experiment. And that little yellow circle is Tokyo. The experimenters put a blob of slime mould over Tokyo, and over all the nearby towns, which are the white spots, they put a little blob of oak flake. Slime moulds really like oak flake. And so then they sat and they watched and they waited. And you can see from the second picture over to the right, you can see that initially the slime mould sent out tendrils to explore the area. But by the time it gets to the bottom right, 26 hours later, you can see that there's lots of little green filaments going out, and the eerie thing is that those filaments match the railway network designed by human engineers. And last year, computer programmers analysed how slime moulds make decisions, and they used that to build a computer program to search for filaments in the cosmic dark web that extends out through space. So slime moulds are forcing scientists to revise their ideas about what it means to be intelligent. In other words, they're making people rethink what it means to think. And the pioneer of all this slime mould research was Gulielma Lister. I mean, if only she'd known what she was unleashing. But of course, there's no great monument to commemorate her because she was a Quaker. And as a Quaker, she insisted on a modest headstone that matched everybody else's. At her own request, her ashes were scattered over her mother's grave in the garden of the Quaker Friends Meeting House. And on the right, you can see the stone that's commemorating Gulielma and one of her sisters, Edith.
I cannot tell why, but the rustling of grass as the summer winds pass through the fields where I lie brings to life a lost day long ago, far away, as in childhood I lay looking up at the sky and the white clouds that pass, trailing isles of grey shadow across the gold grass. Oh, the dreams that drift by on the slow flowing years, the dreams that snow flowing years, hopes, memories, tears. In the rustling of Avril Coleridge Taylor was very much like Lister in that she gained her inspiration and her determination to follow her heart and her work from her father, the composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor. So, like Gulielma Lister, she was very influenced by her father and his choice of career. So the song, The Rustling of Grass, marks the end of Dr. Fara's talk on Gulielma Lister. But there is more to come, because she has left an extraordinary legacy down, and which I'm sure is going to extend down the ages. And in the Natural History Museum, some of the specimens that she used to study there are now being ably looked after by Dr. Gothamie Weerakoon, who is the senior curator of lichens and slime moulds, those wonderful slime moulds at the Natural History Museum. So Gothamie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
I shall
Thank
hand
you,
over to you.
Frances. I hope all of you can see my screen now. Okay, very good evening to you all. Thank you for inviting me to this session. The senior curator of lichens and slime molds at the Natural History Museum, London. I could be the first South Asian woman scientist to hold a senior curator position at the Department of Cryptogamy at the museum. My research interests are focused on the taxonomy and ecology of tropical lichens, bioindication and conservation of lichenized fungi in endangered habitats. My main responsibility as the senior curator of British, general and historical herbaria is to manage and develop one of the world's largest lichen and slime mold collection with 450,000 specimens. I am interested in making the collections available for both scientific and historical research. I completed bachelor and master's degree in Sri Lanka and obtained my PhD by conducting research at the Natural History Museum. I spent 5 years after that in America as a postdoctoral researcher at the Field Museum of Chicago, USA, and received research funding from National Geographic Society. Most of my fieldwork was conducted in South Asia and Southeast Asia, observing lichens in their natural habitats. Currently, I supervise master's, MPhil, and PhD students in UK, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. I serve as a research consultant on collaborative projects conducted in UK, Scotland, Germany, Netherlands, Vietnam, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and China. My current research projects involve a monograph for Graphis, the most specious lichen genus in South Asia, IUCN red listing of threatened lichens and slime molds in the world, collaborative research in renewable sources of bioactive products from endolichenic fungi in mangrove ecosystems, ecological relationships and bioindication of tropical lichens in threatened habitats in the tropics, using lichens as indicators to monitor nitrogen pollution in Asia. Fungi. When it comes to fungi world, only about 120,000 species have been described so far. But current estimation ranges from 1.5 to 5.1 million fungi in the world. Lichens are one form of fungi, but slime molds are not fungi or plants. As Patricia mentioned, they are sitting in the protozoa kingdom or protozoa class. However, they have been studied by mycologists, people who study fungi in the past, as their sporing structures recall some fungal ones. Slime molds, they eat by ingesting food, enveloping and drawing in particles, especially bacteria cells, while fungi eat by absorbing dissolved food by secreting enzymes. So you and I also secrete enzymes on our food that break them down. However, slime molds were considered part of mycology in the history. The science was not so developed like today, so they thought, the old mycologists told, slime molds are sitting in the fungi. I first came across Miss Lister while I was reading for my PhD. Details of her work was on the book chapter of Introduction to the History of Mycology. She was known as Queen of Slime Molds, so I became interested to read her publications. As a young PhD student, I had those books available to me through Natural History Museum library. Miss Lister's collection of slime molds with beautiful drawings and scientific annotations are deposited in our museum. It is one of the historically important collections held at our museum. Former lichen and slime mold curator Dr. Holger Theus and NHM librarian Andrea Hart were very much involved with this collection when I was a young PhD student. As a result, two of Miss Lister's illustrations were published on the book of Women Scientific Illustrations. She is also famous for collecting lichens, especially Pseudocephalaria aurata. She collected them on lime ridges under cliffs in Dorset. However, this lichen species is now extinct in England. So you can understand, although she made them in the 18th century, this is one of the last remaining specimens what we have for the England. So she made some valuable collection, not only slime molds, but also lichens. Miss Lister was a slime mold taxonomist. So taxonomist is a person who gives names for different organisms by studying their morphology and chemical characters. We only had very few women who were taxonomists in historical mycological world. It was a dominant men who actually studied or had the dominancy in fungi world at that time. She was the honorary curator of the British Museum of Slime Molds. So Patricia gave you a lot of information about women scientists and their status at the British Museum during that era. Taxonomy is also a fashion of my life. I am fascinated about Miss Lister's annotations and lavish illustrations. I followed her and became the senior curator of slime molds and lichen collection at NHM. Miss Lister did a lot of field work and described many new slime molds. I am a taxonomist and I work a lot in the field, especially exploring hidden habitats in Asia, hunting for unknown species. It helps me to describe new species to science like Miss Lister. To date, I have described over 100 new lichen species to the scientific world. I am not an illustrator like Miss Lister, but make macro photographs in the field. Miss Lister's illustrations were part of her descriptions when she was describing new species and on her publications. Likewise, I use macro photographs in new species descriptions. Miss Lister had a very strong correspondence with fellow scientists, especially European scientists, who were in the same field. We, mycologists, are part of a worldwide network, and we work together. Especially, we need each other's expertise when we deal with taxonomy, naming new species. Miss Lister is a role model. She was my role model. She is followed by many women like me in mycological sciences. She herself is truly a queen in her century. I would like to thank you all for listening to my short tour.
Thank you, Gothamie.
Thank you, Gothamie. And I think Patricia has some people that she would like to thank as well.
I do indeed, yes. I've already thanked David Boot and Maureen Measure, but in addition, I'd like to thank two people from Essex, Paul Ferris and William George, and also the archivist at the Lyme Regis Museum, who's called Richard Bull.
Yes, and of course, all three of us, we'd like to thank Leyton&Stone Local History Society, and particularly Maureen for inviting us originally, and to David for his introduction, and to Robert for sorting out all the technical stuff. We just wanted to tell you a little bit about where this has come from. The work that we've shared tonight was part of this Electric Voice Theatre project, Echoes from Essex, and some of you may know about Essex 2020. I hope some of you do. Ours was one project in this very large project which was funded locally as well as nationally. And for this project, obviously we had partners mainly in Chelmsford Civic Theatre who helped us very much. And our programme, Echoes from Essex, lasted for about 5 months. And we featured, as part of that project, 6 women from Essex. Here's 3 of them: Margaret Cavendish from Colchester, Elizabeth Tollett, Stratford-le-Bow, Ellen Wilmot, who some of you may know, Worley Place. We featured her work, of course, Gulielma Lister from Leytonstone, Beryl Platt, the Baroness Rittall, and Florence Attridge, who was an engineer from Chelmsford. And all of these women were featured over that time. And Gothamie and Patricia and I gave a talk as part of this project on Gulielma Lister, and Patricia gave a talk on all the other ones as well. And we had other scientists come along who worked in their field and spoke to them. So it's left behind an enormous legacy for Essex. On our website, which is electricvoicetheatre.co.uk, where you will find music from composers from the past, from Essex, podcasts. Gothamie features in one of them, as well as Patricia, and the Essex Virtual Choir, which sang a song for Essex and talks, and we commissioned artworks as well. And Gulielma's art is part of that. So you heard a song by Avril Coleridge Taylor, and her link to Gulielma is really this link with her father, Samuel Coleridge Taylor. And we managed to find her music online, but we were very lucky to be able to work with Britton Piers at Oldbridge to find music by Imogen Holst, who, as some of you may know, is associated with the Thaxted Festival. And Imogen Holst, her work also came from her father. Some of you may know Gustav Holst, who of course wrote The Planets, among many other wonderful pieces. And Imogen followed in his footsteps. And we're going to finish with a very short song by Imogen Holst. It's a setting of another folk song. And we're going to show you, as a final reminder of Gulielma's work, some of her sketches again, and some microscopic views of the slime moulds that she was so famous for. So this is a song by Imogen Holst, arranged by Imogen Holst, and it's called the May Day Carol. It's not quite May yet, but we'll get there, I think, very soon. So, the hedges and fields are clothed in green as the early leaf. Our Heavenly Father waters them with his morning dew so sweet. Now we've been rambling all the night and some part of the day, and as we're returning back again, we've brought you a bunch of May. A bunch of May we've brought you here, and at your door it shall stand. It is but a sprout, but it's well budded out by the works of our dear Lord's hand. My song it is sung, and we must be gone. No longer can we stay. God bless you all, both great and small, and we wish you a joyful May.
Well, I think that's the end of Frances' contributions. I think it's for me to start thanking her and Patricia and Gothamie for just an extraordinary presentation to us. The amount of work that's gone into it is incredible, and done during lockdown. So all these wonderful photos and images of manuscripts and books and so on, all put together without much access, physical access to libraries, and under the strains of the pandemic. I know Gothamie has been separated from family members. Just a wonderful achievement for us in Leyton Historical, and a lot of emphasis on how much Gulielma Lister was a Leytonstone person. I think I was inclined to underplay how close her association was. But our presenters have not done so. I was just astounded by the coordination between Frances Lynch and Patricia Fara, and the way they interweave their contributions earlier on in the presentation. Live singing in a bit of a Zoom session, and even a bit of a costume performance. I would not have thought it possible, really wouldn't. And all given to us with no airs and graces. We've been made to feel thoroughly welcomed by our three presenters, and I just can't thank them enough, really. But instead of drivelling on, is there anybody who's got, perhaps it's time for questions? Yeah, I can see Robert has unmuted everybody, or no, it's not quite done. Anyway, there'll be a contribution very soon, opportunity very soon to make any points, raise any questions you've got. Does anybody want to start off?
Well, it's just that we'd very much like to invite our speakers to the walnut tree in Leyton, Ohio, when it is open again, because at the rear of the pub there are displays of local people of interest, including Gulielma Lister.
That's the first stop after lockdown for me. I'm going to the Walnut Tree pub, I'm going to Epping Forest, I'm going to Wanstead Park, and yeah, I'm just going to enjoy Leytonstone, where I'm afraid I've never been.
Yes, absolutely. I've been to Leytonstone, but I haven't been to this particular pub. I'm sure I've been to all the others.
And everything's very close together. I mean, just short walking distance from the Sycamore House to Wetherspoons to the Friends Meeting House to Wanstead Park. It's all in quite a small.
Church Hall was used by the drama group Woodhouse Players, anything from the Crucible to pantomime until the lockdown.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm not sure that anybody from the Woodhouse Players is here this evening, but I certainly would expect them to see the recording when we manage to put it on the website. So I'm hoping that we will create something which will grow and grow as a ball rolls along the earth into something much larger, I think, and hopefully some contributions to our Historical Society newsletter on Gulielma Lister and her special connection with Wanstead Park and Epping Forest. Anybody else want to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, in your research, if you'd come across a copy of that little book.
I can't read it live.
It's called Lime Landscape with Figures.
No, I haven't. Oh, is that the one by Muriel Arbor?
Yes.
Yes,
You have to say
I
the author's mother had been given a collection of slime moulds by Gulielma Lister.
That's right. So her mother is a woman called Anne Arbor, and a couple of years ago, you know, when life was normal, Francis and I went down to Camden Town, and there was a ceremony to put a blue plaque on the wall for Anne Arbor. And now Muriel Arbor was her daughter. Anne Arbor was at the North London Collegiate School. And Gulielma Lister went to the school to give a talk, and she saw that this little girl was very excited and very interested in what she was talking about. So she gave her 2 or 3 slime moulds in a little box, and the mother never forgot that. And then when Muriel Arbor, by some means I can't remember, ended up going down on holiday with her family to Lyme Regis, and so she came to know Gulielma Lister quite well through that connection through the school.
Mary Claire Martin has raised her hand.
So thank you very much. Oh, am I muted? I actually wanted to ask a more scientific question about lichens. I know the lecture was about slime moulds, but I mean, Epping Forest is still a wonderful place for wildlife and nature, and I've noticed quite a lot of quite unusual lichens growing there. And I was wondering, nowadays, should you just leave them where they are and not pick them? I mean, are they in danger of becoming extinct?
Gothamie,
Yes, Mary. So that I know that British Lichen Society, several of our members has gone to Epping Forest several occasions in the past, not very recently, and we have several lichen specimens actually collected about 10 to 20 years ago from Epping Forest. So they are in our British collection. Actually, under current Anthropocene, the modern world human threat, I would not touch them. I would not recollect them because, you know, the air pollution, the temperature, the changing climate, everything is very destructive things on the lichens. So lichens are challenged by all these changes. So we better leave them alone where they are, unless we really need a scientific specimen. So I
Thank you,
would
Doc.
always discourage people collecting lichens unless they are fallen on the ground by the wind or rain or snow.
Thank you, Guthrie. Claire, you've got your hand raised. Claire Weiss.
Yes, indeed. One of my, some members will know, purely as an amateur local historian, is of mulberry trees. And I embarked on a study of the mulberry tree in Leyton&Leytonstone house, which is only just around the corner from Sycamore House. But in terms of Gulielma Lister, I was studying the mulberry tree at Wanstead Golf Course. Now, Wanstead Golf Course is part of Wanstead, the original Wanstead Park. So I came across Gulielma Lister's study, 1939, that list that you showed, that booklet that you showed us. And I read every line. I was looking for a reference to the mulberry tree because I was looking at it from a historical point of view. How long had it been there? Who planted it? And, you know, she kind of disappointed me, really, because I don't think she was interested in trees. It was a fingertip survey of the ground and the small plants and so on. And there's a kind of throwaway remark at the end of her study where she says, at the south of the park, there was a gnarled old mulberry tree. And to me, that was wonderful. But, you know, she slightly dismissed it in its grandeur from my point of view. So I became interested in her and what she was studying. And it was interesting to know that she had that life in Leytonstone, and I'm still studying further aspects of Leytonstone House, people who lived there before the Buxtons and so on. So thank you very much for filling in more about this wonderful scientist.
When I was
it's
doing
been
research,
brilliant this evening also to hear
'cause
the artistic and musical aspects.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Because I couldn't go to the archives, I went on to A Books and I bought this book by Gulielma Lister. It's called The Mycotozoa, and I don't know if you can see. There's a very long title. The title is The Mycotozoa: A Short History of Their Study in Britain, an account of their habitats generally, and a list of species recorded from Essex. And exactly as you say, much of the book is a list of different kinds of trees and what kind of slime molds and lichens and fungi and everything you can find in those particular trees. So she was very concerned about how the trees affected the habitat or comprised the habitat for the other organisms. But you're absolutely right. She took the trees as a given. And as far as she was concerned, the trees were just somewhere that the lichens and the slime molds and everything happened to live. But there's pages after pages after pages of ash trees and oak trees, and I haven't looked for mulberry trees, but I'll have a look.
So if I
Please
give you a bit more information, so we have 74 notebooks of Gulielma Lister's everyday work deposited in the museum with the collection we own from her. So not only her publications, so actually they are like scientific diaries. So that, you know, whenever she goes on an expedition and collect some slime molds and lichen, she drew them. And she made scientific notes like how long they are, the width, and what color, which kind of microhabitat they were collected from, and which day of the year, the month, and also that sometimes it is obvious to see that she has visited the same place many times to see that how long she can see the slime molds there. So like she has notes like, okay, May 11th to June 7th, something. So she know exactly, she noted down exactly where this thing is coming. So like fungi, most of the time, the slime molds can be seen in the same area, the specific species you can see in the same area. So not only she has observed them 1 year, but she repeatedly observed them. So sometimes we see that different colors of the pens, she is writing, okay, 1986. So it was seen from this date to this date. And then 1838, this date to this date, something like that, that continuous scientific diary notes on them. So these books are amazing.
So Claire, could you tell me what mulberry is in Latin? Because the index of the book is in Latin.
Morus.
Oh, Morus.
Morus. Morus.
Okay. That goes from moorland to moss to mountain to mucilage. Sorry.
Oh,
So I'm afraid I can't help you, but it does list a lot of
Okay.
mulberries.
Thank you anyway.
Draw list.
Thanks.
I'm going to put somebody on the spot and ask Patricia Moxie if she would recognise a slime mould if she saw one, because I certainly would not.
Well, I mean, we've seen the wonderful illustrations this evening. I mean, they are microscopic, aren't they? I mean, I think that, you would agree that they are something you're going to need a hand lens to actually really see the details.
Well, Gothamie has promised to take me on a slime mould expedition when lockdown is over. So
Yes.
I did try to look for some myself, and I tried to grow them in a box in the airing cupboard, but it wasn't very successful.
This week, my 5-year-old grandson pointed to a mark on paving stones as we came into my home, and I thought it was a lichen, but I have no idea what it is. It's a mark on the paving stones, but I have no idea what it is.
I don't think it's a...
Anybody else want to contribute? Ask a question? Yes, Mary Claire is back again.
Sorry.
Gothamie's going to say something.
Patricia, I really like the talk. I can't see you now.
I'm still there.
You may know this already, there's a really interesting little memoir in Vestry House Museum called Memories of Old Leytonstone, which only exists in paper copy, but it's worth a read when you get a chance to go there.
Okay, I will. One of my plans is to come down to the museum. Okay, what Vestry House Museum? What was it called again?
It's something like Memories of Old Leytonstone.
Oh, I'll have a look.
I can find the. I mean, I could dig out the reference for you. Actually, it might even be in here.
Oh, David.
And I mean, it's literally a kind of mini autobiography. It's quite entertaining.
No, I love reading things like that.
And well, because do you remember we have met before? No, we did our training for the to be PhD students at the Institute of Historical Research.
Oh yes,
probably changed the beyond recognition.
I remember, yes.
So my PhD was on Leyton and Walthamstow, and it's
you were doing your research into women. Yeah, I remember.
Children.
Yeah. Oh, how nice to see you. I'd completely forgotten. No, I recognise you now.
Yeah. Oh well, that's nice. But anyway, so you made me remember that my work was on religion, so I picked out the bits on religion.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else want to put a question, make a comment? Not sure I can find something to pick upon.
There's
Irene Davis.
Irene Davis.
Right.
Irene Davis has got her hand up.
Right. Can you speak up? Yeah.
Yes. I would like to say, first of all, how fascinating I found this. We, at the Friends meeting, knew a little bit about, some of us, about Gulielma Lister, but I knew nothing at all about slime moulds. I would like to ask, are they in any way connected to these things I've only been hearing about in the last couple of years? I think they might be called myceli. There's some kind of underground fungus with remarkable, really remarkable extent of their spread, and of the interdependence they have with trees. Are these slime molds in any way biologically connected to them? And do slime molds live up in the air, in the atmosphere that we breathe, or do they live underground, or where?
Okay,
Irene, so mycorrhiza fungi, as you say, they are mostly found in soil, and they have a huge, massive mycelium network which connects thousands of trees in a woodland together.
Yes.
Absolutely correct. But when it comes to slime molds, they have no connection with that mycelium. So slime molds themselves are completely independent from the mycorrhizal fungi. But they are also found in the soil. So they are on the same microhabitat, they are on the same soil, but scientifically, they don't interact with each other.
I see.
And your next question, whether slime molds are found in the breathing air, that the air that we are breathing.
Yes.
No, they are not. No, they are not. And also slime molds, so far, we don't have any scientific evidence to say they are pathogenic. It means that they can cause any sicknesses to us or other animals or other plants. Even if any parts of slime molds are carried by the wind or water or spread by other animals, there is no threat from them to us or other animals. So slime molds, although that a lot of us think they are part of the fungal world, actually they are not. So, but they are there, like you and me, so
yes.
Everywhere.
Right.
Especially they like that moist habitats and less sunlight, and a lot of them are found on the plant debris, on the decaying leaves, right underneath the decaying leaves. They love to spread their network through decaying material because bacteria are found abundant, and that is a good food source for the slime molds. So they love to be where a lot of bacterial cells are found. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Clear answers to very good questions, I thought.
If you want to know more about fungi and the mycorrhizal networks, the book to read is by Merlin Sheldrake, and it's called Entangled Lives. And he's an absolutely brilliant writer, and he explains them in sort of, well, I understood it, so they're quite easy to understand because I'm not a biologist.
Right.
And also some wonderful YouTube videos are there about lichens, mycorrhizal fungi. They're fun to watch. I love watching them.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else going to speak up? Well, if you don't have any brilliant ideas, I shall start winding up and allowing our wonderful, wonderful presenters to have a bit of their evening left. No?
Sorry.
Yes, I can see Georgina's clapping silently, which I think we all agree with. So I'll just remind you all of what a wonderful evening we've had, what extraordinary presentations and